Hey, what's good, everybody? Darren German here with McDonald Realty, and it's time for your real estate update with everything that's going on in Surrey. Now, this is related to the city of Surrey combined. That's got Cloverdale, South Surrey, North Surrey, and everything in between. So let's get into it right now for the month of April 2026. I'm going to remind everybody when we're talking about prices in today's video, we're using what's called a benchmark price from the home price index. And what is that? Well, the home price index, it's a algorithm put together for us by students or by UBC anyways. I don't know if it was students, but what it does is it measures the typical home value over time. It's not a real house, but it's kind of a fake house with consistent features. And what it does is it tracks how that value goes up and down over time. So I want you to think about that a little bit like inflation for houses. And we can do this for big areas like the whole city of Surrey, as an example, like we're doing in this video. We can do this down to neighborhoods and product types. So we could say what's happening in Newton for condominiums as an example. So it's a really cool tool to pay attention to. Now, the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board just released these statistics the other day, and there are some fascinating things that are going on and that is going on, and some things that we haven't seen in quite some time that I think is going to surprise you if you're a regular viewer of these videos. So this news release goes on to say a couple things that I wanted to highlight. We're seeing some early signs of stabilization in the market with benchmark prices edging up month over month for the first time in 11 months. First time in 11 months. They go on to say that listings on the multiple listing service saw a 20% increase month over month for the month of February. And there was only 1,000 sales. So, we're talking about an extra 200 sales roughly, but that's still pretty good. We're still 3% below the same month last year and 42% below the 10-year average. So we're not kind of out of the woods in terms of 10-year average and whatnot. Overall inventory remains elevated in the Fraser Valley with 9,200 active listings, up 10% from February and 50% above the 10-year average. So some fascinating numbers there. Now, what I'm showing you on the screen here, just for the general viewer, the red line represents all of the properties in the Greater Vancouver Board, which is kind of Whistler down to Vancouver, Richmond, Tri-Cities, Maple Ridge, and what's really happened to the values over the course of time. And the blue line is the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. So if you're watching for Surrey purposes, that includes North Delta, basically all the way east to Abbotsford, and the condominiums, detached homes, townhomes. But let's get into the kind of the nitty gritty here and what you're really here for. So condominiums. So this is the sales to active ratio. As a reminder, the red line that you're seeing on that graph represents, generally speaking, a balanced market condition where there's no advantage to either party. Below that red line, you're in a market that kind of favors the buyer because there is tons of inventory out there. They got lots to choose from, meaning they don't have to act quickly. Sellers are trying to court them, and usually they're trying to court them with their prices, and then you see softening of prices. So you can see that we've been well below a balanced market for quite some time. Really, if you don't count that little kind of blip, it's been since early 2025. Now, that said, the market has slightly improved month over month, but it's still in a relatively difficult place. You're still seeing about 1 out of 9 properties that are coming to the market transacting. And again, that means sellers are having to court people with their price. So ignore that little April 2023 on the screen there. That wasn't necessarily meant to be there. But what you can see, and what I do want you to pay attention to, is just what's happened with values over the last year or so. And you can see it's starting to maybe flatten out a little bit towards the end there, kind of current days sort of thing. Month over month, we've seen condominiums down roughly about $2,000 since the month prior. And year over year, they're down about $49,000. So what does this all mean? Well, the market is clearly still an advantage for the buyer. Activity, however, has improved month over month. In fact, that's 2 months in a row that we've seen activity improve where the conditions have been a little bit better than they were the month before. So something definitely to pay attention to. Spring is here. It typically is the busiest market. We did a really fascinating video on this YouTube channel as well about those people who wait for spring, whether you're a home buyer or a home seller, kind of unpacking some of the myths and disproving a lot of the things that you may think to be true about waiting to sell your home during the spring or waiting to buy a home during the spring. So definitely go search that up because it's a pretty fascinating video. But spring is here. It's typically one of the busier times of year. Usually this is where the most amount of properties kind of transact between now and I would say like, mid-July maybe. Rates, if you have been following this channel for a while, the Bank of Canada has been pretty forthcoming about interest rates likely not changing this year. So if you're someone that's been kind of sitting on the fence waiting for that, there's definitely lots of information out there that I implore you to go check out. Sellers, you still need to be competitive with your pricing though. The market conditions, while have improved, they are still incredibly difficult, and you need to pay attention to that because we don't necessarily know that we're done either in terms of giving some of that hard earned, well, maybe it wasn't hard earned, some of that equity back that you might have gained over COVID. We don't know if we're done giving some of that back. So that's another great reason to subscribe to this channel. Make sure you're paying attention to that. Let's talk about townhomes. So again, there's that balanced market in the red line. You can see townhomes 2 months in a row have also increased in terms of the sales to active ratio. And now they're floating in and around that 15 to 16% mark, and coming up from where they were at about 10%. And there's a big difference between 10% and 15%. 10% is 1 out of 10, 15% is about 1 out of 6, 20% is 1 out of 5, right? So as you get closer, as that number goes higher, that's much more competitive markets really jumping quite quickly. And the interesting thing is seeing this activity improve in townhomes has actually impacted pricing 2 months in a row now. So you can see that little bit of a jump up there in terms of since the start of the year. So townhomes month over month are up in the city of Surrey, up about $2,900. And I want to remind everybody too, we are painting everything with a very broad stroke brush here, right? Like Surrey's a big place. There's lots of micro markets, as I talked about. A townhome in Newton is not necessarily the same thing as a townhome in Grandview in Surrey, in South Surrey rather. They could be doing different things. So just take that into account. That said, though, $2,900 up month over month in the city of Surrey, and year over year, they're down about $68,500. So we're still clearly, or sorry, we're not, it's not clear. It is clear in my head that this market has actually started to be an advantage for the sellers. Now, that's the first time in a long time that I've been able to say that about anything. But look at this. You've had activity increase 2 months in a row into a balanced market conditions. You've had prices go up 2 months in a row. 1 month certainly doesn't necessarily make a trend, but when you start seeing 2 and 3 months, there might be something there. I think we're seeing in a market as an advantage of the seller. Now, activity has increased. We've seen the prices come up 2 times in a row, month over month. This is always the market I'm very fascinated by. This is the missing middle market for all the millennials out there that are starting families, or maybe they've got families. Those 1 and 2 bedroom condos just don't fly anymore. So they're going to be paying attention to these properties. And as soon as they have the opportunity to jump up and act, they're going to, because they need the space, they need the amenities, and it's still in a price point that makes sense for them. So definitely a market we're going to want to continue to pay attention to. Let's talk about detached now. You can see detached was coming out of a pretty nasty place here. Okay, so you can see that graph starts in and down in and around 5%. In my example I used earlier, the significance about running between 10 to 15%. Well, 5% is 1 out of 20 homes actually transacting. Now it has jumped up since then. It's at about 10% now. So we're at about 1 out of 10 homes actually transacting. But of course, that's going to impact the market because buyers have a ton of choice. And again, sellers trying to court them by adjusting their prices and trying to get them in to take their homes off the market. Now, fascinating enough, the market increased, or the benchmark price increased month over month by about $2,200. Now, one thing I've noticed if you watch this channel regularly is I actually find that the benchmark prices, to me anyways, because I'm somebody who's actively trading in the market all the time and we do a high volume, what I normally find is this number, it feels like it trails what's actually happening in the market by about 2 months. So that could be that spike that we saw, towards the end of 2026. It's hard to know, but we have seen the prices, the benchmark prices come up. So it's suggesting that the detached homes are up about $2,200 month over month, and they're down about $165,000 year over year. That is terrible. Clearly, this is a market, even with that little gain, $2,200, when you're talking about, benchmark prices of homes being up around like 1.4, 1.5 million. Clearly, we're still in a market where we have 1 out of 10 properties transacting that is in the advantage of a buyer. So there's still tons of inventory to choose from. Go shoot your shot. There's a lot of people out there that are interested in selling and committed to selling. So put your offers out there and see what you can do, because once that market turns, you never know if you're going to be able to negotiate a deal quite like you could today. And we just really simply don't know when that market might turn. If you're a seller, hope is not a strategy. You cannot bury your head. When we go back and saying, even when we've got 1 out of 10 properties selling, that's still a very difficult condition, and that likely will continue to have downward pressure on prices. That's why I've said prices are up for the first time in months and months and months, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a trend there. So keep an eye on that. Now, I want to show you this. There was a big announcement recently by the federal government. And actually, it was announced about a year ago, but it just actually came into effect and is actually backdated. And what that is, that's all in relation to new construction properties and the removal of GST on those properties for eligible first time home buyers. Now, this information is very, very difficult to find, what the calculations might be, who's exempt, that sort of thing. So, there's a really great blog post that we put on my website, and in fact, we put a calculator on there. So some of the information is easy to find, but specifically the information that was difficult to find was what the sliding scale was, where the full rebate kind of ends at $1 million. Anything under that, you get the advantage of paying no GST if you're eligible. But between 1 million to 1,500,000, there's a sliding scale, and it was not easy to track this stuff down. So I went right into details on like CRA website documents and all that sort of stuff. And I found all this information for you guys. So it's all there. That said, we've also got some really great videos coming out on the topic. One specifically about an issue that's going to be created in the market because of this announcement. This is a great announcement for home buyers, but it might be a problematic announcement for some home sellers, especially those who have relatively new properties, who may be completed on those properties within the last 5 years that are needing to sell them. These are people who did pay GST on those properties. So there's a really fascinating problem that's been created for those people. Make sure you go search out that video and check it out. And it's going to be really, really interesting for those people and see what happens. And I've got some predictions about what's going to happen as well. Now, to wrap this all up, what's going on in the market? What are some things that you definitely want to pay attention to? Mortgage rates. I don't think much is going to happen. I mean, we do have a war going on now, so who knows? This is a crazy world. You never know. But the Bank of Canada has been pretty forthcoming that they don't expect many changes in that regard. Economic shifts, as you know, we had that. Well, not we. It wasn't our announcement, but there was that big Supreme Court ruling on what was considered the illegal tariffs happening in the United States. I know there's some new ones that have now come in and whatnot, but that was actually good news for our market to have that happen. So it'll be interesting to see how the market reacts to that. It usually takes some time for that sort of stuff to kind of flow into the market and actually make an impact. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. We are into one of the busiest seasons of the year typically. So going into spring, while we're talking about YouTube videos and whatnot, and I can't even remember if I mentioned this earlier, but we've got a really fascinating video we posted to the channel about those buyers and those sellers that wait to transact in the spring. And there's some myths and unpopular things that they do during those times that they're kind of wrong about. And I've got some data to back that up. So search out that video. It's really quite fascinating. And local policy changes, I don't think there's going to be much going on based on what's happening with the prices of homes. So I think the provincial government's going to be a little bit quiet with all that stuff for the foreseeable future. So anyways, we'll see what happens. But let me know in the comments if there's any questions you have. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see in these videos. And again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of these. I hope it was of value to you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Cheers.